A little girl grabbed a police officer and whispered something that made no sense at first. Across the room, a man was walking toward them calm, confident like he already owned her. He said he was her father. But the way she looked at him wasn't confusion. It was fear, real fear. Minutes later, a single sentence exposed something much darker than kidnapping, something that could erase who you are completely, and what they discovered next wasn't just about one child. It was already spreading. So the real question is, what if the person coming to take you could make you forget you were ever in danger? Stay with us because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. April 17, 25, 23, 2 p.m. Sunset Diner, Route 9, New Jersey. Lunch hour noise filled the diner. Plates clinked. Waitresses moved fast between tables. A radio played softly behind the counter. Nothing about the afternoon seemed strange until the front door opened, and a little girl ran inside with panic written all over her face. She was small, thin, and breathing too fast. Her hands were shaking. She crossed the room without looking at anyone else and threw herself against Officer Daniels, who had been standing near the register paying for coffee. Her fingers locked around his arm so tightly that even he seemed startled. "Don't let him take me," she whispered. Her voice was so low that Daniels almost missed it, but the fear in it was impossible to ignore. He knelt slightly, trying not to scare her. "Hey, slow down. You're safe." "Who?" But Sophie did not answer. She only stared past him, toward the diner entrance, eyes wide and fixed like she had already seen something terrible. Daniels followed her gaze. A man had just stepped through the door. He did not rush. He did not look nervous. He walked in calmly, almost too calmly, scanning the room until his eyes landed on the girl. Some months ago, 30:10 p.m., gas station, Route 9, New Jersey. Daniels remembered the first time he had seen her. She had been sitting near the side wall of the station, dirty, quiet, and alone. No crying, no name, no family rushing back for her. She had flinched when anyone came too close and pulled away from every stranger except him. Later, when he brought her water, she had whispered one sentence that stayed with him ever since. "Don't let him find me." Back in the diner, that same fear had returned, only worse. Daniels placed one hand gently in front of Sophie as if shielding her without making a scene. The man came closer and stopped a few feet away. His face stayed controlled, but the child's whole body stiffened. "I'm her father," he said. The words hit the room hard. A few people turned. The waitress behind the counter stopped moving. Sophie shook her head instantly. "He's lying," she said, almost choking on the words. Daniels looked at the man, then at the little girl hanging on to him like he was the only solid thing in the room. This was no simple misunderstanding. He could feel that much already. Something was wrong, and the child knew it before anyone else did. Daniels stood up slowly, keeping Sophie close behind him while his eyes stayed on the man. He had seen family disputes before. He had seen frightened children pulled into adult arguments they did not understand. But this felt different. Sophie was not confused. She was not upset in the ordinary way children were upset. She was terrified in a way that looked learned. "If you're her father, prove it," Daniels said. The man did not react with anger. That was the first thing that felt off. He stayed calm, almost rehearsed. He slipped one hand into his coat pocket, and Sophie let out a sharp cry before she could stop herself. Daniels moved his hand toward his weapon, but the man only pulled out a photograph. "This is proof," he said. He held it forward carefully. Daniels took it and looked down. For a second, the room seemed to go quiet. The photo showed Sophie smiling beside the same man. Not scared, not hurt, happy, clean, comfortable, like she belonged with him. Daniels felt doubt hit him hard and fast. The man watched his face closely, like he had been waiting for that exact reaction. "She's been confused lately," he said in a patient voice. "Her mother passed away. She's had episodes. I've been trying to get her home." It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Daniels looked back at Sophie. She had gone pale. Her breathing had turned shallow again. "He makes me forget," she whispered. Daniels frowned. "What?" She stepped closer, voice shaking. "He makes me forget things. He makes kids forget." Those words landed differently. They touched something in Daniel's memory, an old briefing, a case discussion, rumors about children found safe but changed, children who returned home quiet, distant, wrong in a way no one could prove. Daniel's attention sharpened. He handed the photo back but did not step aside. "Take one step back," he told the man. For the first time, the calm expression slipped. It was small, but Daniels saw it. Irritation, maybe anger. Sophie looked up at Daniels with desperate eyes. "He wants you to lose control," she said. It was a strange thing for a child to say, but it stopped him cold. She was not only scared, she was warning him. Daniels lowered his voice. "You know this man." Sophie nodded once. "He takes kids and changes them." The man suddenly moved, fast enough to prove he had been waiting for an opening. He lunged forward, not at Daniels, but toward Sophie. Daniels reacted immediately. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. The man hit Daniels' shoulder, but Daniels drove him back and forced him down against a table while two diner customers rushed in to help. Seconds later, handcuffs clicked around the man's wrists. He stopped struggling almost immediately and looked up with a smile that made Daniels' stomach tighten. It was not fear. It was not defeat. It was confidence. At the station, that confidence only got worse. The files they found in his bag were not normal custody papers or family records. They were child files, too many of them, with notes, photos, names crossed out, names rewritten. Daniels stared at them in disbelief. These were not missing children. These were children being remade. And suddenly Sophie's words no longer sounded impossible. They sounded true. The station felt colder after that. Daniels spread the files across the table one by one while another officer photographed everything. There were names, dates, locations, school records, family details, medical notes, and photos of children taken at different stages. Some were smiling, some looked empty. Some looked like they had stopped being children long before the photo was taken. Daniels kept turning pages, hoping to find one clear answer that would explain the rest. But each new document only made things worse. This was organized, deliberate, planned. Not the work of a desperate man grabbing children at random. It was a process. Sophie sat in the next room with a blanket around her shoulders and did not ask a single question. She only watched the door. One officer came in with a hard drive taken from the suspect's car. Another brought a box of notes from a storage unit connected to one of his aliases. The deeper they went, the uglier it became. The children in the files had not simply disappeared. Many had been returned. That was the part that made Daniels stop and stare. Returned to homes, returned to schools, returned to grandparents and foster systems, but the notes attached to their names said things that made no sense at first. Compliance improved, original resistance fading, identity replacement stable, memory disruption successful. Daniels read those lines twice, then a third time, feeling anger rise in his chest. These children had not been rescued and healed. They had been altered and sent back. "Sir," one of the detectives said from across the room, voice tight, "you need to hear this." He pressed play on an audio file from the hard drive. A man's voice filled the room. Controlled, clinical. The child resists most at the beginning. Repetition removes attachment. Language reconstruction reduces recall. Once the self weakens, replacement becomes easier. Daniels stared at the speaker. He had worked cases involving abuse, trafficking, coercion, and neglect. But this was something else. This was not about hiding children. This was about taking who they were and replacing it with something easier to control. He looked through the glass at Sophie. She had tried to tell him in one sentence, "He makes me forget." In interrogation, the suspect sat with his hands folded, posture relaxed like he was the one interviewing them. "What did you do to those kids?" Daniels asked. The man smiled slightly. "Nothing they didn't eventually accept." Daniels slammed one of the files onto the table. "You call this acceptance?" The man's smile widened. "They don't need saving. They need rewriting." The words hit hard enough to still the room. Daniels felt something shift behind him and turned toward the hallway. Another child from a connected case had been brought in earlier for evaluation after seeing the suspect's photo. That child was sitting with a counselor. Then the child began whispering, "They don't need saving." Quiet at first. Then again, "They don't need saving." Another officer stepped into the room and said a second child in medical intake had started repeating the same sentence. Then a third. It moved through the station like a sickness no one could see. Daniel stepped back slowly, the truth forming too fast to ignore. This had spread beyond one man. Whatever had been planted in these children was still active. The suspect watched his face and leaned back in his chair. "You can arrest me," he said, almost amused. "But I'm not in one place anymore." Daniels left the room and went straight to Sophie. She looked up before he spoke. "It's inside them, isn't it?" she asked. Daniels hated that a child had to understand something this dark, but he nodded. Sophie's face tightened, and for a moment he saw fear give way to something else, anger, resolve. Later that afternoon, several of the children sat in a quiet room together, still, confused and lost in ways that were hard to measure. Sophie walked in slowly. She no longer looked like a girl only trying to survive. She looked like someone making a decision. She sat beside them and spoke softly. "You don't have to listen to him anymore." One boy turned toward her, eyes full of uncertainty. "Then who are we?" he asked. Sophie took a breath and answered with a steadier voice than Daniels had heard from any adult that day. "Whoever you want to be." It was a small moment, but Daniels felt it. The first crack in the control had begun. April 20, 2025, 11:25 a.m. Foster Care House, Willow Street, Newark. From the outside, the house looked exactly like the kind of place people trusted. White siding, clean porch, quiet street, a trimmed lawn, children's shoes by the front steps. After everything that had happened, Daniels wanted to believe this was finally a safe place for the rescued kids to breathe, sleep, and begin again. Several of them had been moved there temporarily while specialists evaluated their cases. Sophie, who had started asking to be called Emily, sat on the front steps watching the others play in the yard. She looked calmer than before, but Daniels had learned not to confuse silence with peace. He stayed near the walkway, speaking with a caseworker while keeping one eye on the children. Then one boy stopped in the middle of play. No warning, no reason. He simply froze, turned, and walked toward the house without saying a word. Emily saw it first. Her expression changed instantly. "That's not normal," she said. Daniels turned. But before he could answer, she was already on her feet. Some months ago, Emily had lived in another house that looked safe too. She remembered the windows, the bright afternoon light, the quiet schedules, the voices that came when adults were not looking. "Sit down, repeat this, forget that, smile now." She had spent so long being told what to think that normal rooms no longer felt normal when danger entered them. Back in the present, she followed the boy inside. Daniels went after her. The hallway was clean. The kitchen looked ordinary. Toys were stacked in a basket. A television murmured in another room, but the boy stood by the wall staring ahead with blank eyes. Then he spoke in a low, flat voice. "Time to reset." Emily stopped cold. Daniels felt the hair rise on his arms. A soft sound came from somewhere above them. Then a calm recorded voice filled the hallway. "Close your eyes." The boy obeyed instantly. Emily's face drained of color. "No," she whispered. More movement came from the yard. One by one, children began walking inside, quiet, expressionless, pulled by something invisible. Daniels reached for the nearest child, but the same voice continued from hidden speakers inside the walls. "Breathe slowly. Let go. Listen." Emily looked around with growing horror. "It's still here," she said. It never stopped. Daniels shouted for the caseworker to call backup and started searching the walls, the vents, the ceiling corners. The children kept moving inward, not running, not resisting, just following commands as if an old switch had been turned back on. Some years ago, Emily had sat in a straight, back chair in a room that smelled like disinfectant while a voice repeated instructions until her own thoughts felt far away. She remembered how it stole time first, then names, then feelings. That memory hit her now with enough force to shake her. But this time she did not freeze. She ran toward the hallway speaker she had pinpointed by sound, dragged a chair beneath it, climbed, and ripped the panel down with both hands. The device tore free and hit the floor. The voice cut off at once. Silence filled the house. Real silence. One of the children blinked and started crying, sudden and hard, like waking from a nightmare. Another looked around in confusion and asked where he was. Daniels stared at the broken speaker, then at the walls around him, realizing there had to be more. A caretaker rushed in from the back room, face pale with anger and panic. "What did you do?" she shouted. Emily turned on her. "You knew." The woman hesitated, and that hesitation told Daniels everything. "They said it was therapy," she said weakly. "They said it would help them adjust." Emily shook her head. "No, it keeps them controlled." By the time police finished searching the house, they found more hidden devices in vents, behind wall panels, and inside 2 bedrooms. The foster home had not been safe. It had been another layer of the same system. Later, after the children were taken outside and the house was shut down, they sat together in the daylight looking confused, tired, and more human than they had that morning. One little boy looked at Emily and asked, "What do we do now?" She sat beside him and answered in a calm voice, "We start remembering." And for the first time, that answer did not sound impossible. April 25, 2025, 9:40 a.m. Joint Operations Facility, Newark, New Jersey. By morning the room was already full. Detectives, federal agents, child psychologists, cybercrime analysts, and local officers all stood around a wall of screens showing maps, case files, and connected locations. Daniels had not slept much, neither had Emily. After the Foster house raid, everyone had hoped they had finally reached the outer edge of the damage. Instead, the new evidence made it clear they had only uncovered one working branch of something much larger. Analysts had tracked signal patterns from the hidden devices found in Newark. They were not isolated. Similar communication signatures had appeared in multiple states, sometimes near foster homes, sometimes near private care centers, sometimes near schools and child treatment facilities. The same phrase appeared again and again in recovered files, recordings, and witness statements. They don't need saving. Daniel stared at the map as red markers spread wider across the screen. New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Georgia, Texas, California. It was no longer a case centered on one man or one city. It was a system that had already rooted itself across the country. A technician enlarged one cluster after another while speaking in a careful voice that did nothing to soften the reality. These are not random overlaps. The devices were linked. Some of the funding channels overlap. Several staff records from different facilities were altered in the same pattern. We believe the network was designed to survive if one node was discovered. Daniels folded his arms, jaw tight. So taking down the man in Jersey changed nothing. Not nothing? The analyst replied. But not enough. Emily stood near the back of the room silent, watching as if each new marker on the screen confirmed something she had feared all along. She had stopped looking like a child simply trying to recover. Now she looked like someone living in the shadow of a truth she had recognized before anyone else could name it. When one federal agent asked whether they had identified a central control point, another screen came alive with a data cluster traced to an old private medical complex outside Trenton. The facility had been inactive on paper for years, but power use, hidden traffic, and encrypted transmissions said otherwise. If there is a command hub left, the agent said, it is likely there. Daniels turned toward Emily when he heard her breathing change. She had gone pale. You know that place? He asked. She nodded once. I've never seen it from outside, she said quietly. But I know the voices from there. The room fell silent for a second. Daniels stepped closer. What do you mean? Emily looked at the map, then down at her own hands. Some voices were local. Some came through speakers in houses or rooms, but there was one voice that always sounded farther away, colder. Like it wasn't talking to one child. Like it was talking to all of us. No one interrupted her. That place, she said, pointing at the screen, feels like where it came from. Within the hour, a tactical team was assembled. The complex sat isolated behind overgrown fencing and empty service roads, the kind of place people stopped noticing years ago. On the drive there, Daniels kept checking the rear seat where Emily sat between two specialists. She had insisted on coming. Every part of him wanted to say no, but her knowledge had already led them farther than any database had. By 11:15 a.m. they were inside. The building was mostly quiet, but not abandoned. Monitors hummed in dark rooms. Backup generators ran beneath the floors. Hidden recording chambers lined one corridor. In another room, rows of archived files filled cabinets from wall to wall. Then they found the central chamber. It was not dramatic. It was worse. Clean screens, control panels, audio routing systems, a nationwide list of linked facilities. Real names crossed out and replaced with coded identifiers. The system had never depended on one abductor. It had depended on process, training, access, and silence. A senior agent cursed under his breath. Daniels just stared. They were standing inside the machine that had rewritten children and returned them to the world wearing their own faces. Then Emily stopped moving. Do you hear that? She whispered. Daniels listened. At first there was only a low electrical hum. Then a voice faint. Not from a speaker in the room, from the control channel itself. Return. Emily grabbed the edge of a console to steady herself. Her eyes lost focus for one terrible second. Daniels moved fast. Emily. She looked at him, frightened now in a way he had not seen since the diner. I'm still connected, she said. The technician nearest them turned sharply. What? Emily's breathing became uneven. I thought it was over, but it isn't. Something in me still answers it. The lead analyst rushed to the central terminal, typing quickly. Seconds later his face changed. Sir, he said to Daniels, we found an adaptive routing structure. It used living response patterns, emotional triggers, repetition maps. Daniels stared at him. Say it clearly. The analyst swallowed. The system used children not just as victims. Some of them became carriers. Signal anchors. Emily closed her eyes. That's why it followed me, she whispered. Daniels felt the floor drop beneath him. No. Emily looked at him with tears building fast but not falling. If I stay linked, it can rebuild. Maybe not today. Maybe not here. But it will rebuild. Daniels stepped toward her immediately. We'll find another way. But even as he said it, alarms began sounding through the chamber. Remote wipe protocols. Dead man triggers. Backup signal release. The network was trying to preserve itself. On one screen, linked sites across the country began flashing active. The voice returned. Louder now. Return. Emily straightened. Something inside her hardened into decision. For the first time, she said, I get to choose. Daniels shook his head before she had even fully spoken. Emily, no. But she was already moving toward the main interface. She placed both hands against the panel while the technicians shouted for isolation procedures. If I complete the link, she said, voice breaking but steady, I can force the shutdown through every channel at once. Daniels grabbed her arm. And what happens to you? She looked at him then, not as Sophie, not as a frightened child asking for rescue, but as someone choosing her own ending. I don't know. The room around them erupted with overlapping orders. Screens flashed, signals, and Daniels understood with sick certainty that the child he had tried to protect from one man was now standing in front of a choice no child should ever have to make. A week had passed since the Trenton shutdown. Officially, the network was gone, servers had been seized, hidden sites had been raided. Coordinated warrants had led to arrests in 6 states. The phrase that had once passed between children like a hidden command had started fading. Most of the national news reports talked about rescued minors, criminal conspiracy, and long-term investigations. They used words like closure and breakthrough because that was what people wanted to hear. But inside the recovery center, Daniels saw something else. The children were safer now. They were not healed. The center had a bright lawn, secured entrances, soft-colored rooms, and carefully trained staff. On paper, it was exactly what should come after rescue. That morning, several children were outside drawing with chalk while 2 counselors supervised. Daniel stood near the fence speaking with a trauma specialist when one little girl suddenly stopped in the middle of sketching a house on the pavement. She stared ahead, hand still holding the chalk. Then she whispered barely audibly, "He's still here." The counselor knelt beside her immediately, but the child did not blink. Emily, who had insisted on helping with the other children since leaving the hospital, turned at once. Daniel saw the change in her face. She crossed the yard slowly and crouched near the girl. "What do you mean?" Emily asked softly. The child swallowed. "Not him," she said, the voice after him. A doctor led the girl inside for evaluation. Another child began crying for no visible reason. A third covered his ears. Daniels felt the old dread return. "Was shut it down," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The trauma specialist beside him looked troubled. "Maybe you shut down the source," she said. "That doesn't mean you shut down what it left behind." Emily heard that and said nothing, but Daniels could tell she already knew. Some months ago, 20:40 p.m., unknown white room. Emily had sat in a metal chair under bright lights while a voice repeated a command over and over. "You won't remember this. You won't remember this." But in the middle of that conditioning, when she had been close to giving up, she had whispered one private answer under her breath, "I will." She had not understood then why she said it. Back in Boston, that moment came back to her with sudden force. She turned to Daniels. "What if the problem isn't that they're still controlled?" she said. "What if they're remembering?" The doctors ran deeper assessments that afternoon. The early findings were confusing at first, then devastating. Several children were not showing signs of renewed external influence. They were showing accelerated memory return. Buried experiences were surfacing too fast. Voices they had been forced to repeat. Rooms they had been taught to forget. Faces, threats, commands. One boy sat in the corner of a therapy room crying so hard he could barely breathe. "I remember what he made me say," he repeated. Another refused to talk at all, staring at his hands as if they no longer belonged to him. A senior clinician pulled Daniels aside. "Their minds may have been blocked in layers," she said. "Now that the source is gone, those blocks may be collapsing all at once." Daniels looked through the glass at children who had survived the system only to be hit now by the full weight of what had happened to them. "Can you stop it?" he asked. The clinician hesitated. "We could blunt its sedation. Memory dampening protocols. controlled suppression. Emily, who had heard enough from the doorway, stepped in before Daniels answered. No. The doctor looked at her carefully. You understand what this means? Emily's eyes were wet but clear. Yes, it means it hurts. She looked toward the children. But pain is not the same as danger. Daniels watched her, hearing the steadiness in her voice and the age hidden underneath it. She continued, quieter now. They deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Later that afternoon, the little girl from the yard asked to speak to Emily alone. Daniels stayed outside the room but could hear enough through the partly open door. I remember you, the girl said. Emily did not answer right away. You were there? The girl continued. Not with him, near the door. You told me not to listen. Emily covered her mouth, stunned. She had spent so long believing she survived by staying small and silent that she had never considered what she might have done for others even while trapped herself. I thought you forgot me, Emily whispered. The child shook her head. I forgot everything, but not that. When the session ended, Emily stepped into the hallway and stood still for a long moment. Daniels approached carefully. You okay? She nodded, though tears finally slipped free. I thought all I did was survive, she said. But maybe I was helping before I even knew it. By evening, the children were sitting together in a common room. Some talked quietly, some cried, some simply listened. It was not peace, not yet, but it was real. One little boy asked Emily the question Daniels had been hearing in different forms since the rescue. What if I don't like who I was? Emily sat beside him and answered without rushing. You're not only who you were. He looked at her waiting. You're who you choose next, she said. Nothing about the day had been easy. No one left feeling fixed. But as Daniels watched those children remember in fragments, and still remain present in the room, he understood something the reports would never say properly. Freedom had not ended the story. It had begun the hardest part of it. The system was gone, but the voices it left behind were now being met with something stronger than silence. They were being met with truth, and truth, even when painful, was finally giving the children something the network never wanted them to have. Their own minds back. Recovery had started to form patterns. That was the first sign of progress, the therapist said. Predictable meal times, group sessions, outdoor play, sleep routines that did not begin with panic. Daniels had traveled to Chicago with Emily after a referral linked one of the center's residents to names recovered from the Trenton archive. The facility was quiet, careful, and serious about security. Children sat at long tables for lunch while staff moved gently among them. From a distance, it could almost look ordinary. But Emily noticed the empty chair on the first day. It sat near the end of one table with a tray placed in front of it by habit, then quietly removed by a staff member every afternoon. By the second day she asked the question no one had answered on their own. Where is Lucas? The room changed around that name. A counselor paused too long before speaking. He was transferred, she said. Emily looked at Daniels immediately. The answer had come too quickly, too cleanly. Transferred where? Daniels asked. The counselor glanced toward the director's office. I'd have to check. Some years ago, 20 p.m., training facility, unknown location. Emily remembered a thin boy sitting beside her on the floor during one of the silent sessions. He did not speak much. Most of them didn't. But once, when the lights had gone out for a few seconds and no adults were in the room, he had leaned toward her and whispered, "If I disappear, don't forget me." She had never known whether that was fear or prediction. Back in Chicago, that memory landed hard enough to make her voice shake. He didn't get transferred, she said. Daniels went straight to records. The center's intake logs showed Lucas arriving 6 months earlier under a sealed welfare transfer. But there was no discharge file, no destination order, no legal movement trail, nothing that should have existed if a child had really been relocated. It's like he vanished from the system after being placed here. Daniels said to the director, who had gone pale by then, "That's not possible." The director looked stricken. "We were told not to discuss him without clearance." "Whose clearance?" Daniels asked. The man had no answer that helped. That afternoon, while staff were being interviewed, Emily stood near the center's front windows and felt the strange certainty she had learned not to ignore. She stepped outside without announcing it. Daniels followed her into the bright late morning light. Across the street, near a low fence, stood a boy in a gray sweatshirt. He was too still, too calm. He did not wave. He did not run. He just looked at Emily like he had been waiting for her to notice him. "Lucas," she said. Daniels tensed immediately. The boy looked thinner than Emily remembered, older in the face somehow, like time had moved unevenly across him. When Daniels took one step forward, the boy finally spoke. "They couldn't fix me." Emily froze. "What do you mean?" Lucas's mouth trembled before the rest of his face did. "I remembered too much." Daniels glanced around the street, scanning for handlers, watchers, anyone who could have brought him there. He saw no one. "Who brought you here?" he asked. Lucas ignored him. His eyes stayed on Emily. "They erased everyone else better," he said. "I kept remembering pieces, rooms, the songs, the words they said. I was unstable." Emily moved closer very slowly. "Lucas, come with us?" He shook his head once. "I'm not like you." Some months ago, 40:05 p.m. dark room, same facility. Lucas had been strapped to a chair, fighting harder than most children ever could. Emily remembered hearing him scream from another room. "I don't want to forget." A voice had answered from behind a speaker. "Then you don't get to return." Back in the present, the meaning of that memory settled into place with sick clarity. Lucas had not been rescued late. He had been withheld, hidden because the system could not fully overwrite him. "You can still come back," Emily said. Lucas laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Come back to what?" he asked. "I'm what they couldn't finish and what they couldn't erase." Daniels stepped in carefully. "You're a child who survived." Lucas looked at him then, and for the first time Daniels saw the panic beneath the stillness. "I hear it sometimes," Lucas whispered. "Not like before. But enough." His hand went to his head. "I keep hearing the sentence." Emily's voice softened. "Lucas." But it was already happening. He took 2 staggered steps backward, breathing faster. "They don't need saving," he said once, like the words had slipped loose against his will. He grabbed his own hair. "No." Then again louder. "They don't need saving." Daniels started forward, but Emily lifted a hand, stopping him. She walked the rest of the distance herself. "Look at me," she said. Lucas kept shaking. "I can't stop it." Emily reached him and took his wrist, firm but gentle. "Yes, you can. Not by fighting the words. By hearing something else." He was crying now, openly, the way children do when the effort of staying intact finally breaks. "Like what?" Emily's answer came at once. "Your own voice." The next minutes were messy, painful and slow. Lucas dropped to his knees on the grass while staff ran out from the building. Daniels stayed close but did not crowd him. Emily stayed right in front of him, making him answer simple questions. "What is your name? What day is it? What color is my sweater?" Each answer pulled him a little farther out. "Lucas," he whispered eventually, then again, stronger. "Lucas." By the time medical staff brought a blanket and water, the sentence had stopped repeating. Lucas looked wrecked, but present. A younger boy from the center stood in the doorway watching all of it with wide eyes. "Is he okay now?" he asked. Lucas looked at Emily, then at Daniels, then back down at his own hands. "I'm trying," he said quietly. Daniels had heard tougher words from adults in courtrooms and interrogation rooms. None of them felt as brave as that. Lucas had not returned healed. He had returned unfinished, hurting and afraid. But he had returned. And for the first time since the system had taken him, someone was finally telling him he was still allowed to belong. By then, most of the major raids had been completed. The public case was moving into court preparation, and the quieter work had shifted towards sorting evidence, matching identities, and tracing who inside the network had built which part of the process. Daniels had come to New York to review material from a private storage chain used by one of the dead aliases connected to the original suspect. The unit itself was small and cold, stacked with labeled boxes, archived electronics, and sealed document bags. Emily was there because too many recovered items meant nothing to investigators until she saw them. She stood near a metal shelf while Daniels and an evidence tech cataloged audio drives and damage control modules. "This one wasn't listed," the tech said, pulling a small gray device from behind a box of intake forms. It fit in the palm of a hand. No serial number, no asset tag, no inventory reference. Daniels frowned. "How does something get missed in a sealed unit?" No one answered. The device looked dead until the tech turned it over. Then a small light blinked on. Emily stiffened immediately. "Don't touch anything else," Daniels said. They set the device on an empty table. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then a voice came through the speaker. Calm, measured, familiar. "If you are hearing this, it means I failed." Emily stepped back hard enough to hit the shelf behind her. Daniels felt his own chest tighten. It was the same voice they had heard in fragments before. Not shouting, not threatening. That made it worse. "You think destruction is rescue." The recorded voice continued. "You think removing structure restores the child." But what if the child preferred not to remember? Daniels looked at Emily. Her face had gone pale in a different way than fear. This was recognition tied to memory. Some years ago, 12 at 10 p.m. underground facility, unknown location. Emily remembered the man once standing just outside a conditioning room. He was not loud. He did not need to be. He watched children the way mechanics watch unstable machines. I do not create control, he had said to someone beside him. I reveal what is already broken and make it useful. Back in New York, the message kept playing. Pain is disorder. Attachment is instability. A child who forgets may suffer less than one who remembers fully. Daniels wanted to shut it off, but he also knew every second mattered. The voice was not confessing. It was teaching. That was the part that crawled under his skin. It was designed to survive through ideas as much as systems. One of the younger techs in the room whispered. He really believed this. Emily answered before Daniels could. That's why he was dangerous. The recording continued. You call it theft because you worship identity. But identity is fragile. Identity is often the first wound. Daniels clenched his jaw. That line hit too close to what he had been seeing at the recovery centers. Some children did not fear memory because it was false. They feared it because it was real. One boy who had been helping process recovered artwork in the adjacent office had wandered to the doorway during playback. He spoke before anyone noticed he was there. It was easier when I didn't remember. The room went still. Another child in a nearby counseling room, hearing only fragments through the open door, said quietly, I didn't feel anything back then. Emily closed her eyes for a second. The message had found exactly the weakness it was built to find. Not obedience. Exhaustion. Daniels moved to turn the speaker off, but Emily stopped him with one word. Wait. He looked at her. Why? Because this is the last thing he left, she said. If we don't hear it fully, it stays larger in our heads. Daniels stepped back. The final part of the recording played in a tone so calm it sounded almost gentle. I did not build a prison, the voice said. I built a choice. Then the device went silent. No dramatic shutdown, no final threat, just silence. The evidence tech exhaled shakily. That's it. Daniels stared at the dead light on the device. No, he said. That's the point. There was no signal left to track, no code to break, no hidden activation routine. Just an argument, an idea. Emily stood still for a long time after the room cleared. Daniels remained with her near the table. He was wrong, he said. She nodded, but slowly. Yes, she said. But he knew where people break. Daniels did not disagree. That afternoon, back at the temporary family support room, several children sat together after hearing filtered explanations from the counselors. No one pretended the truth was easy anymore. A little girl looked up at Emily and asked the question Daniels had been expecting since the message ended. What if it hurts too much? Emily sat beside her, close enough to make the answer feel shared, not delivered. Then we face it together, she said. The girl frowned. What if I want it to stop? Emily looked at her with the honesty that had become her strongest kind of courage. Then we help you carry it until it doesn't feel impossible. Daniels watched that exchange and realized how different the room felt from the beginning of the case. Before, silence had meant danger. Now silence sometimes meant people thinking hard, choosing carefully, staying present. The message had tried to make numbness sound merciful, but looking at those children, some still trembling, some still confused, he understood the real difference. Numbness had never been peace. It had only been absence. The system offered absence and called it protection. Healing asked them to feel, and called that survival. By evening, the hidden device was bagged, logged, and sent for deeper analysis, but its real evidence had already been collected in the room. Not the hardware, the reaction. The children had heard the argument beneath the network at last. Forget to avoid pain. Lose yourself to avoid fear. Let someone else shape the parts of you that hurt. And for the first time, they were not hearing that logic alone. They were hearing it in the presence of people ready to answer back. At the Philadelphia Recovery School, Ava followed every rule but never spoke. Emily realized this wasn't fear, it was control. Ava had stayed silent to stop the system from spreading, but that meant she carried it inside. When Emily gently reached her, Ava finally broke. I'm tired, she said, and everything came out, the voices, the commands, the fear. She cried openly for the first time. Emily held her steady and told her she wasn't alone anymore. Later, when asked if the voices would return, Ava said softly, maybe, but now I won't listen. At a Seattle school, everything seemed normal until one child whispered, I remember. Within seconds, all the children froze as memories came back at once. Panic spread. They cried, shook, and relived everything. Emily stepped forward and spoke firmly. You remember because you survived, not because you're broken. Slowly, the chaos softened. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed. The children began to process instead of panic. Later, one boy asked if it would ever go away. Emily answered honestly, no, but it gets easier when you don't face it alone.